On ASCO's opening day, we're here with medical oncologist Jack West, the web editor of JAMA Oncology. A recent study in JAMA Oncology reported on whether cancer survivors were more likely to have health insurance after the Affordable Care Act was implemented in 2014. Did the ACA help cancer survivors in that regard?
Absolutely. In fact, what this paper by Sanford and colleagues demonstrated was that in the last 3 years in the database, 2014 to 2017, there was a significant increase in the reported rate that patients or former patients with cancer had insurance. So it did what it was setting out to do. It also helped to address some racial disparities that had been present before the ACA came about.
That's an important point. How does that fit in with the ASCO theme this year of caring for every patient and learning from every patient?
I think that one important issue that ASCO is really tackling more and more is healthcare policy and insurance coverage. In fact, that is going to be one of the presentations at the plenary session, which really shows how important this has become on racial disparities and the ACA. So we'll learn about that in the coming days. But the fact is that that's being focused on. And when we talk about learning from every patient, we need to capture these people, because if they aren't getting treated because they don't have insurance, we are missing not only the opportunity to learn from that, but also importantly, critically, to help these people. So improving the insurance coverage is an integral part of what ASCO should be focusing on.
That's also an important point. There are efforts now to roll back provisions of the ACA. How does ASCO handle those situations?
ASCO is intimately involved with policy and is based in DC and has people who are important in ASCO's leadership from all over the country coming regularly to Washington to meet with legislators to talk about the importance of access to care. So it is an ongoing dialogue, and fortunately, ASCO is working actively to maximize the proportion of people who have access to insurance and cancer care.
It'll be very interesting to see how this plays out over the next few years. Now let's move on. You will be giving a presentation as part of a genetic testing session today at 2:45 p.m. Could you tell us about your presentation?
I'm going to be talking about a very timely issue of how to translate next-generation sequencing reports into clinical practice. And I would say it's really critical. We come to meetings like ASCO and other big international cancer meetings. We review journals all the time trying to find new targets and new treatments. But the fact is, we need to do better translating the results we have now into better treatment and outcomes. And the fact is, there are sobering results when we look at how we actually do in the U.S. in getting the best treatments for patients based on NGS testing. There was actually a paper in JAMA by Singhal and colleagues just a couple of months ago that looked at a database from Flatiron Health that included over 3,500 patients with stage 3 or 4 non-small cell lung cancer who also had NGS testing. And that showed that only 2/3 of the people with an EGFR mutation or ALK rearrangement, which are two of our most compelling, very standard first-line treatment approaches, if we find that target, we have a pill that can work extremely well, but only 2/3 of the patients got that. And that was not just first line, where we ideally will give it, but at any time in their treatment. And other less common or less established treatments that are still generally recommended were only offered and administered 1/3 of the time. So we have a lot of work to do just in delivering on the targets that are established. At the same time, we have a challenge where many of these NGS reports that are coming in are bragging about how many biomarkers and they can find for each patient, but that's unfortunately pretty low yield and often amplifying numbers by generating a lot of garbage that leads to a lot of confusion for oncologists and potentially leads to worse treatments when oncologists are recommending things based on very ill-advised choices and are replacing better established ones. So there really needs to be careful evaluation, both to find the targets that are most valuable and to filter out the ones that are questionable, or at least relegate them to later after we've exhausted the established treatments.
Are there some specific strategies that may help overcome these barriers?
There are several genomic databases, and these are publicly available, and they are curated very often by teams of experts. They integrate lots of information, so I and other oncologists can go there and look for whatever we can find, anywhere from preclinical data to case reports or larger studies that could give me a sense of what might work for a patient. But then, of course, there's also the larger guidelines like NCCN, ASCO has guidelines, ESMO, several others. So those are the ones that are most important. But when you need to look into ones that are less established, that's where these genomic databases come into place. And there's also several places that will allow you to submit cases to their molecular oncology tumor boards or commercial services that offer support for the people who don't have a molecular pathologist on hand for them.
Does this mean that molecular profiling reports are used more commonly now in clinical trials rather than clinical treatments?
No, I would say that certainly molecular testing is done increasingly broadly, and that's a good thing when we need to, in non-small cell lung cancer at least, and increasingly in other cancer settings, test for multiple potentially relevant markers. If it doesn't make sense to test for 5 markers with different tests, if you can capture all of them and many other potentially important markers all at once with one NGS test. But the challenge is if the expertise to interpret that is limited to a narrower subset of centers, and then the broader community is left with a lot less expertise and potential to do more harm by missing the stuff that they need to capture or giving the wrong treatments based on the less established and arguably ill-advised treatment choices.
Where do you think this field will be in, say, the next 5 or 10 years?
I think we'll be better at it. We will have a lot more aggregated data, and that will mean that we can make better choices about the less common mutations. We will have lots more case reports and knowledge. And the fact is that the more molecular testing is done, the more that feeds into the big data concept. I think this is going to be a setting where eventually artificial intelligence or some kind of algorithms are really going to be the killer app, maybe the introduction of where they're most demonstrated a value in medicine, because they can interrogate databases in a way that a human may not have time or mental capacity to do. And it's a finite question, but it's something that I think is well suited to machine learning and integration. It would be great to have that as a complement to our own efforts, our own mental efforts. There will still, I think, be a role for teams of experts at centers where they have molecular tumor boards, groups of molecular pathologists who really focus on the questions of what to do for a specific mutation, and importantly, which ones to ignore. But I think that we will definitely get better at it, but we have some growing pains right now as we're basically integrating new tools that we are not all equipped to manage just yet.
It's a fascinating field. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely.
Dr. West's presentation is during a session on genetic testing at 2:45 p.m. today in Hall D1. Follow us on @JAMA Network throughout the ASCO meeting for live tweets and more new research from JAMA Oncology. Thanks for watching.